Well, hello and welcome to another episode of the Change Minds podcast. My name is Owen Fitzpatrick, and today we're going to talk about ghosting. Ooh, I'm a ghost. I'm going to get you. No, that's not the kind of ghosting that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this concept of ghosting, which really is something that's been made popular. Not popular as in, oh, I can't wait to ghost. More so popular as in, a lot of people are ghosting over the last few years. Ghosting is the phenomenon whereby a person cuts off all contact very suddenly with somebody else that they've been in a relationship with, or a work relationship with, or a friendship with, and very quickly and very sort of direct way, they cut off contact. They do not give any sort of explanation. They do not let the person know why. They just stop talking to them. They ignore them and they head off into the sunset. Ghosting is something that is done quite a lot in the modern world of relationships, particularly around the dating phase. When you're dating somebody, very possible that they could just get to the point where they just stop talking to you. And therefore, when we're in the online world of dating, that's something that we need to be conscious of, that it does happen, and it happens quite a lot. I'm not saying it happens all the time. You're probably listening to me going, oh, so when Owen was dating, it happens a lot, eh? Oh, it must have happened to him a lot. Not that surprised. Well, it happened a few times, all right, but it didn't happen a massive amount. But it's still, when it happens, the reason I bring it up is it really impacts you, or at least it can really impact you quite significantly. Therefore, when it does happen, it's much easier to remember those experiences than other types of relationships that you might have over time. And it doesn't just happen in terms of dating, it also happens in friendship. It happens with certain work colleagues, for example. And so what's really important, I think, is to understand what ghosting is all about. Why does it happen? Why do people ghost? And once we understand that, then it makes it a little easier for us to figure out, well, what can we do about it? Now, we might all, I'm sure, maybe in my past, I've been guilty of it as well. I've been in a situation whereby I've cut off contact. I think very rarely, but it might have been a situation where I felt that that was the best thing to do. So I think we all potentially have ghosted at one point in our life. And what's really critical is to understand like I said, the psychology behind this so that we can figure out how are we to reconcile what goes on in our experience with what our expectations are. In other words, how do we get over it? How do we figure it out? How do we make it so that we're able to look back and feel differently about something like that, which again, for a lot of people can be quite traumatic. And also, well, why is it traumatic? Why is ghosting such a difficult experience for us to have? So before we get into ghosting, I want to talk about what I call ghosting's cousin, and that is the silent treatment. And the silent treatment is something where usually in relationships or friendships, people will stop talking to you. So for instance, someone's pissed off for some reason and they stop talking to you and they act as if you're not there. And you could be in a group with people and they just act as if you don't exist. And why this is in my opinion, a cousin of ghosting is because both of them effectively do something similar. Now, there might be more manipulative reasons around the silent treatment, but nonetheless, both of them act as if you don't exist. And you know that you do, right? You know that since Descartes came along with, I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. Sorry about the pronunciation. If it's wrong, if it's right, brilliant. But we know we exist, but yet the people that acted as if we existed up to recently now all of a sudden act as if we don't. And that performance that they have can impact us a lot. Because if you think about it, when you don't exist, it's the same as being dead. I mean, if you're dead, you're no longer, and in fact, when you're dead, you're still probably a memory they'll have. So they'll still be thinking about you or your name might be spoken. I can't remember who said it, but there was a great quote that I heard about your life lives on. I think it was even a movie plot. Your life lives on until the very last person speaks your name. So from the time this means Aristotle's still alive today in this sense, right? Obviously, Jesus, Muhammad, like all of these well-known figures in history are still around because they've been mentioned by somebody somewhere, right? Even like Lucy, I think one of the oldest human forms to live, right? The oldest humans, or one of the oldest humans that we know existed, still alive in this sense. And so when somebody dies, at least they still have that presence. When someone goes on the silent treatment, they act as if you don't exist, and that can be very, very difficult to deal with. And so then ghosting is even stronger in the sense that when someone ghosts you, there is no contact, right? They just get on with their own life and you have to get on with yours. And you don't get any story or narrative told to you as to why this happened. When somebody dies, you know, oh, it was this, it was that. But when this ghosting happens, it can be quite devastating. Now, once again, I know that grief is pretty much the worst experience a person can go through, or very, very difficult to get through or to get over. And I'm not saying that ghosting is on the same level as grief, because with grief, you have a closeness with the other person, and then all of a sudden it's not there. And it could be very easy to argue that ghosting happens whenever it's destined to happen. In other words, you shouldn't be that surprised when you're ghosted. You should be looking for the signs. And we will indeed talk about that. But I'm just trying to point out how painful ghosting can be when it's experienced. And it's something that I do believe can get better at. And that's what I want to explore today. But to start off with, I want to start by sharing an experience I had when I was much younger. When I was a kid, I had a group of friends on my road, and there was one of these friends that I had who, I can't even remember what started it, but for whatever reason, he just stopped talking to me, stopped acting as if I was around. And whenever we'd be around, he would completely and totally ignore me, like look over my head. It would be like whenever I spoke, it was, I mean, I look back now, it was a pretty good performance, because it would be like when I spoke, it didn't factor into his way of thinking. And I still remember it vividly to this day because I was devastated. It really had an imprint on my life. And to this day, I feel that it really affects me with regards to the silent treatment. Now, I don't remember how we got back talking, and sure, if it met him today, it'd be great. But it was still one of those profound childhood memories that sticks in my head, because for 1 year or so, I had somebody that acted as if I didn't exist. And it was traumatic. I'll even use that word, because for me, it was dominating so much of how I felt at the time. Since then, I've had the silent treatment a number of times by different friends and whatnot. And I've also been ghosted a number of times. Sometimes in terms of the dating scene, as mentioned, sometimes by friends. I've had a number of friends who all of a sudden just ghosted, just stopped talking. And to this day, I've not spoken with them. And even recently, had a couple of experiences in the last year or so where people just stopped talking. And I'd love to turn around and say that none of it bothered me, that I was like, yeah, well, I'm old enough now and I have a different experience, but I'm also probably more that kind of person that sentimentalizes, or that really likes the idea of finishing on good terms with everyone. And you can't always do that. Sometimes you just got to accept it. So when I talk about this, I'm not just talking about something that I figured out, or it doesn't bother me because of some robotic, I'll teach you this NLP strategy. I'll teach you this CBT strategy. And by the end of this, you're going to transform the way you feel about ghosting, so that when someone ghosts you, it'll be water off a duck's back. Not going to happen. But what I do hope to do is share with you some of the things that have helped me and still help me in the way in which I'm thinking. So getting straight into it, why do people ghost? I think the first core reason why people ghost is avoidance. They like to avoid the conversation. People don't like to have difficult conversations where they're going to be talking about delivering feedback to you that they're not interested in a relationship, for example, or they don't want to have a difficult conversation where they share their emotions. Sometimes it suggests that they're lacking emotional maturity. they're not emotionally mature enough to have conversations with you and make you aware of how they're feeling. They're uncomfortable doing that. Therefore, it's easier for just the head in the sand technique to pretend that you don't exist anymore. It's easier for them to disappear than it is for them to talk. So oftentimes it's the avoiding of uncomfortable conversations, the avoiding of awkwardness that can lead people towards not wanting to do it. It could also be a case of them being occupied with something. So it could be a sense of they're uncertain in the relationship or friendship. They're unsure of what they should do. They're feeling unsure of the potential future of the relationship. And therefore, instead of having the conversation and potentially being persuaded by you to maintain it or whatnot, they resort to, okay, well, it's easier if I just stop talking. It's easier if I switch off. Maybe they're going through stuff. This could be a legitimate reason. Maybe they're going through a mental health struggle of their own, and it's hard for them to talk. It's hard for them to be around you because they're struggling themselves and they're going through stuff, and therefore they don't want to invite you in. Maybe they've developed feelings for you. Maybe your friend have developed feelings for you, and that's the reason why they don't want to talk. I know that seems weird, but oftentimes they know it's almost like forbidden, or they're terrified of being rejected, and it's too painful for them to stay as friends. Therefore, they ghost, right? These are all possibilities. I'm not saying that they're all true. I'm saying they're all possibilities. Maybe something else has come along and it's distracted them. Maybe they're dating you and then someone else comes along, they fall in love, and all of a sudden the new shiny object means that they're just absorbed with that person. And then it's the easiest thing in the world is to plug you out, to cut off all connections from you. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, in this context, both in terms of what they're occupied by or even avoidance, is they might avoid for a short amount of time, or maybe they're occupied with something for a short amount of time. But then once they've spent a few months ghosting, it's so much easier to keep ghosting, because if they don't keep ghosting, then they have to go back, and then it's too late. They'll think to themselves, oh, I have to go back and explain to Owen why I ghosted. Now I have to go back and explain why this, why that, why the other. So from that point of view, that's also potentially a reason why people ghost, is because they feel too awkward and uncomfortable and, I suppose, embarrassed about the fact that they've already ghosted. So now they're a lot less likely to come back to you as a result. And so I think all of these are different plausible reasons as to why people ghost. But then there's also the tactical. And the tactical could be that they're genuinely trying to protect themselves. So this self-protection is trying to help them to avoid the uncomfortable conversations, but they know they'll be hurt. So they're actively trying to protect themselves. But it also could be a manipulative tactic. So they could be using it the same reason a lot of people use the silent treatment, designed to get you to feel bad so that you become desperate for them, so that they gain control in the relationship. And this is temporary ghosting usually, when they'll eventually come back around. But during that time, they have you being desperate because there's no explanation to cut off. And in many ways, the normal thing to do is to keep reaching out to them, because if you've built up a decent sort of relationship or friendship with them, because if you suddenly end the relationship with someone without telling them why or anything like that, very normal for them to want to know that and for them to be motivated to keep hassling you about it. And you could easily then feel a sense of power because they're the ones begging for your friendship, even though they might not be begging for your friendship or relationship. They're actually begging for the explanation. But you get to be powerful in that moment. So it could be a manipulative thing. But by far the worst form of this is punishment. And this is when they punish you with ghosting. So they say, right, I'm pissed off with this person for whatever reason. Now let's see how they like feeling powerless and feeling this and feeling that. So you punish them through ghosting. You cut off all contact. And it's the equivalent of the threat, you're dead to me. They're actively acting like you're dead to them. So these are all different possibilities. So you see some of them are not, negative. Some of them are just them hurting, and some of them are them not knowing what to do, and some of them are them being lazy and not having uncomfortable conversations. And then some of them are just downright nasty. So the reasons people ghost There's a multitude of them, and not all of them are, kind of negative and mean and, you know, bad. But it's important for us to realize. Now, the next question is, well, why are people okay with ghosting? Why is it all right? And it's the easy thing to do is the first reason. People know it's out of all the options they have, it's easy. And also you could argue for some people, they'll argue to themselves that it's easier, it's the lesser of two evils. So I could either tell a person I don't want to see them again, or I could just ghost them. If you take that great movie, Banshees of Inisherin, that was nominated for Oscars, I loved it. But in a nutshell, the story is about these two friends in an island in Ireland in the early 20th century. And one of them just ignores and goes into silent treatment or whatnot, his friend. And eventually his friend gets it out of him. And what he gets out of him is, I'm just bored with you as a friend. You don't do anything for me. You don't stimulate me. You're not a friend I want to keep around, which is very hurtful. So you could argue, well, in that case, is the silent treatment not less mean than that? But both of them are equally quite painful or traumatic. So, and the whole movie is about that. It's a terrific, terrific movie, in my opinion. But what we have to look at is the fact that a lot of people will reason out and go, well, look, instead of having this conversation, I'm just going to ghost. And that way, maybe they have the ability to choose a different narrative or story for themselves, so I don't have to have that conversation. Another reason why it's sort of acceptable is that it's normalized. We hear about lots of example. We hear, especially in the online world we live in, or the online dating world we live in, it is very sort of a lot more normal than it would have been, I think, a while back. We're also more detached in the online world. We feel that not only do our words have less impact, which is why people can be more cruel online than they can be in person, but it's also a case of we're more detached to the outcome. So therefore, it doesn't feel like we're ghosting when we just stop responding to someone's messages, like it might do if we were in the same room as them, for example, or in the same area as them. And then finally, we reason that it's okay. So we find ways to be able to justify it, and we tell ourselves stories which make it okay for us. And we are usually the victims in our own stories. We're just trying to do the right thing by this. Or we're defending our honor, again, if we factor in it as a punishment form. So these are all potential things that are going through people's head when they ghost. And I think it's really useful for us to think through what goes on in someone else's head before we look at some of the strategies that we can tackle, that we can use to tackle it. So I have a number of strategies that I want to offer. The first one is self-awareness. And self-awareness means it's really a good idea to stop and be aware of how you're feeling and label your feelings as a result of this. This is based upon a concept known as emotional granularity, which has been very popularized by the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett, a neuroscientist, who suggested that one of the best things we can do for our emotional regulation is to label our emotions with more specificity. So when you've more emotional granularity, you've got better vocabulary to describe exactly how you feel, and therefore your brain will understand how to give you the adequate resources to deal with that emotion or deal with that effect. So understanding how you feel and being able to articulate it and to share it with others, I think is a very, very important strategy. Self-awareness is about noticing how are you being impacted by this, and also finding value in the emotions. Understanding that because you feel desperate and because you feel all over the place and because you feel upset and you feel rejected and all that, that's not a bad thing. That's indicatory of your relationship with them, the fact that it did mean something, the fact that you let them in, the fact that you trusted them, the fact that you cared about them. And it's very normal for us to freak out because if one person, and this is the real thing that I think hits us with ghosting, if one person can ghost us, anyone can ghost us. So if my friend for this number of years all of a sudden stops talking to me, well, what about my other friends? They can all do the same thing. Then I'm kicked out of the tribe, and then I'm fodder for the lions and the tigers. I'm branching into evolutionary psychology here, but we need to be part of a tribe. We need to be connected with others because that's what keeps us safe. And that's what's trained into our biology from the dawn of civilization or before that. When someone ghosts, It's something that's unpredictable. And since our brains are prediction machines, this is tough to deal with. Something we expected to happen doesn't happen. And we need to be okay with the fact that we're feeling what we're feeling and recognize the value in our emotions. Second thing we can do is engage self-care, right? Start to do whatever we can to look after ourselves. Talk to somebody, preferably a therapist or a psychologist if we need to, but if not, then a friend that's a good listener. But express how you're feeling. Talk about your feelings. Focus on looking after yourself, doing what you need to do to be good to you. When someone leaves your life, it's like they're hurting you. So you need to compensate for that by being good for yourself and staying positive. Third thing you can do is self-respect. And this is really communicating clearly with them. If you haven't heard from them, they seem to be doing a ghosting on you. Spend a bit of time crafting a message where you communicate clearly with them your concern. Listen, I'm concerned that we haven't spoken, that you're not getting back to me. Be open about what you want and what's going on for you and how you're feeling. Do it once. Don't keep doing it. Do it once clearly. Make sure it's clear and send it. And be open to the different responses. Be open for them to lose it with you and, blame you for something that you feel you didn't do. Be open to them being quite upset about things. Be open to all responses, but especially be open to ghosting. Be open to the fact that they might not get back to you. And you have to reconcile that. And you have to then have this self-respect where you don't stoop to their level. You don't attack them or get angry with them for doing it, because once again, what's that going to do? It's just going to help them feel better about their decision. So instead, make it so that you're not continuously trying to get their attention, or you're not sending message after message. Get to the point where you respect their decision, accept and move on. It doesn't mean you send them one message and that's it. You might send them a few before you realize you're being ghosted, but respect their decision. You have to accept that for whatever reason, or there's a multitude of possibilities that we already discussed, they're doing this. And so you have to move on. And you have to recognize that just because they did it doesn't necessarily mean that someone else is going to do it straight away on you. And with that in mind, we go into the next step, which is self-growth. And this is really about analyzing the relationship. Now, you don't want to spend too much time on this, because you don't want to feel as bad as you might feel when you keep reflecting on what went wrong. Why did they not do this? Why did they speak this way to me? But what you want to do is you want to analyze your relationship with signs. What were possible signs that you got that would suggest that they might do this? Understand your own boundaries and your own needs. So what were the boundaries that you allowed them to cross? Or what were the needs that you have that were unfulfilled? What were the indicators that this wasn't good, if there were any? And try to do some brief detective work, looking back and learning from the experiences, basically. What can you learn from this experience with this person? What can you learn from the experience of knowing someone and then being ghosted? And you're going to give them space and time, but give yourself some space and some time to really reflect on what you can learn. And then there's self-compassion. And self-compassion is really, again, not just about caring for yourself, but it's about self-closure. You can't guarantee that they're going to give you closure. In fact, ghosting is one of the things that doesn't provide closure, which is one of the main reasons why people struggle with it so much. So when someone is ghosting you, it's really vital that you take charge of the closure yourself. And that means letting go of a need for any explanation. Years ago, when I was broken up with, I remember a friend of mine said, sometimes things just don't work out. And when he said that to me, it really struck a chord. In fact, it's something I still come back to many times, because even if they come back and they give you an explanation why they ghosted you, you still don't know if that's true. They still could be just telling you what they want you to hear, as opposed to what's really true. So even in the event that you figure out the reason why, well, maybe it isn't the reason why. Maybe you just think it's the reason why. And so it's really vital that we give ourselves the opportunity to let go of the need for explanation. Only a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was in a class in New York, just studying for the summer or something, acting. And there was somebody in the class that I wasn't friends with per se, but I got on well enough with. And all of a sudden, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, they went from being friendly or talking to acting again, the silent treatment stuff, acting as if I didn't exist. And I would go up and talk to them and they would literally look away. I would text them, no response. And even though I wasn't that close to them and, you know, wasn't a huge deal, it really bothered me. Like for the 2 weeks that they did this, every day I was sitting in my class, every day they'd be talking to friends, we'd be in a group of friends, and when I'd speak, they'd ignore. And I think it brought me back to when I was a kid and the same experience. This only lasted 2 weeks, but it really bothered me. And I kept asking myself the question, why? And then 2 weeks later, we were all out or whatever, and she came up to me and apologized, said, I'm really sorry. And then we hooked it out. It was all fine. Still to this day, and I've met up a couple of times since and no ill will whatsoever. But to this day, I still don't know what it was about. No clue. And I never will know. I'm not going to reach out and go, hey, by the way, because once again, people do things for whatever their reasons are, and they're not all negative. Sometimes it's their own stuff going on inside their own head. There's nothing that we can do about it. So I want to offer you and finish up with some practical things you can do, some practical strategies. The first is what I found useful is when someone ghosts you, write a letter to them. And in that letter, express not only how pissed off you are or upset you are that they're doing what they're doing, but also talk about the relationship. Talk about all the great things that you got from the relationship. Talk about all the reasons why you care about them, all the wonderful things that they brought to the friendship or to the relationship or whatnot. And in that letter, also try to find a way to thank them for being in your life and to wish them well. And really what you want to do in this story is you want to get clear on a story that you're going to tell yourself about the future. So you want to make it so that as you're writing this letter, you are finding a way to explain this to yourself moving forward. And obviously you want to be honest with yourself, but at the same time, you want to try to make it so it's positive so that every time you think about this friendship or relationship, and every time you think about the ghosting, you've got a clear story in your head that makes you feel okay about it. Because when you do that, it changes the way in which you will think about that memory forever. And that is what we call self-closure. Another thing that's important is to understand how you will act towards them in the future if by chance you run into them. So 3 possibilities. One is they get back in touch on purpose. How are you going to respond? Making sure that you feel good about your response. So decide how you're going to respond if they come back and try to avoid the whole, I'll show them, I'll silence them. Try to act in a way that's self-respectful, that makes you feel good about yourself. If you never see them again, how are you going to deal with that? And then if you by accident see them again, which wasn't meant, how are you going to deal with them in that situation? And so what I would say, and you could, use humor, you can be cool, there's loads of different possibilities, but just make sure whatever your decisions are, they make you feel good about yourself. And then the other thing is, and I kind of already mentioned this when I talk about the letter, but it's really a good idea to try to wish people well, to give them the benefit of the doubt. When I think about the people that have ghosted me, even more recently, even when it hurts, I try to give them the benefit of the doubt. I stop and I think to myself, for whatever reason inside their head, they're telling themselves a story about me. And that story might be, I can't deal with Owen because it's too awkward or uncomfortable, or that might be, he's done this negative thing, or I don't like him for whatever reason, and therefore, or I'm past him, right? He's no longer in my life because whatever. And therefore, this is what's going to happen. And they're not meaning necessarily to hurt me. That's kind of what I'm suggesting when I say wish them well, is because before you wish someone well, you have to not feel as attacked by them as you might do. And so what I do regularly is just think about them and really hope that they're doing well, really hope that everything is working out for them, really hope that their lives are good. And that's not an easy thing to do when you feel hurt by someone. But once again, You don't know. I tell myself stories about how I am as a friend or how I am as a person all the time. I don't know if they're accurate. So I think it's important for us to recognize that we need to come to terms with what's gone on and then just wish people well. Send out positive vibes to the universe, whatever way you want to put it. It's been quite a serious episode. Sorry about that, but I do hope you found it useful. I've talked about something that is rarely discussed on the podcast, I think, but I hope it helps. So let me know. Please do if you're looking for something to read. I've got a weekly newsletter where I go into some sort of topic about what we believe, what we think, how we feel, hoping to change your mind about something. It's weekly. It's called Inner Propaganda, and I really think you'll get a lot out of it. So please do sign up. It's absolutely free. Go to owenfitzpatrick.com/newsletter. Please keep listening in. Please don't ghost me. No, seriously. I will hopefully have you as a listener a week from now. Until then, may you take care. May nobody ghost you this week. And may the force continue to be with you. Or ghost you ever. And may the force continue to be with you. Bye for now.